Anybody know Dr. Lynn?
My name is Gary Lynn.
Dr. Gary
I'm the
Lynn.
dean of the college.
Well, you're not on camera, Dr. Lynn. You need to move over here.
I like it over here.
Well, you won't make it well in this environment.
And I'll stand on my toes and I'll be talking.
There you go.
My name's Gary Lynn. I'm just doing a quality assurance check on the profession.
Quality. Okay. All right. Well.
So you just write here.
You right here. This is the Elmo, and hey, if you're left-handed like I am, it's configured for you. I'm a southpaw, and I thought, why did they do this? This is wonderful.
Okay, so the camera moves with you, or does it stay there?
No, it pretty much stays. She does. There's 2 cameras here.
There's somebody in there working.
Yes, and you are on live TV.
Well, I hope you do a good job today.
Thank you. This is our Dane, so we got to.
And I'll let you go back to work.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Lynn. Dr. Lynn and I go way back, don't we?
We do.
I've known Dr. Lynn longer than I've known you guys. Anyway, see you later.
Get the shutter open.
If you would shut that, that would be wonderful. Thank you. All right, class. Good to see you today. We're running a little behind the 8 ball here. And I don't need this thing around my neck. I have to hang things around my neck, though, because if I don't, I forget them. So those thumb drive necklaces are really nice to have. Okay, so welcome again here to Microecon. So I guess today's a little more informal, but that's cool. Let me have you guys sign this. What's today's is it the 13th today?
Yes.
Okay, Sarah, if you don't mind. There's only 4 of us here today. My goodness. Of course, that kind of ebbs and flows. People could drift in, but again, I appreciate the viewership online, and so I look at those numbers, and what can I say? So, y'all got any questions about anything? Is everything going all right? It's such a quiet class, which is okay. I'm not complaining. Okay. All right, I've got a little handout for you today. I think I'll give you 2 pages on this. So, kind of a playbill here, sort of. Not really, a playbill. Well, I got enough here. 2. Here you go, Chris. Glenn. I have also posted this little handout online. You bet. Andreas, how are you today? Good. All right. You did great on that test. You and everybody in here. Y'all did well. See, there is a correlation. Exam performance and class attendance. I tell you, you guys are doing all right. So, okay, so I thought this is a little thing I made here. Just to, again, it's online on Blackboard, and let's see here. Last time when okay, I want to correct something. There's a couple of mistakes in your book too. It's like, wow. I want to make sure we make note of this before I forget, because I will forget if I don't. But we'll get there. By the way, so table 16.7 in your text, there's errata. So if we can just look at that. I think radar's going to change this over here to .cam. All right. So because I'm apt to forget it, they work through these numbers here, and this should be the number 1. I don't know why I didn't write 1 there. It's a difference in these 2 numbers. 1. This is on page 334. And the price of capital in that little example, there's $2, not $12. So that's how you get these total revenue, or the marginal products and so forth. To get this to work out right, you have to have price of capital is $2. Okay. All right. We'll come back to that later. Okay. I believe that's right here. I'm just kind of dipped in there. I think I caught that. All right, so last time I will say that we're looking at this diagram here on page 232. It seemed like they had a subtraction sign or something here. That should be a multiplication sign here to get this last column, marginal revenue product. So I'm going to back up and talk about this chart again here today. I just kind of got us into this. We're talking about the demand here's for labor. So you got demand for labor, you got the demand for capital, that is the demand for resources. And those are our two primary resources we look at, capital and labor. So today, we were kind of near the end last time when we had finished chapter 13. We'll skip chapters 14 and 15. So this course kind of wraps up with the demand for resources in chapter 16. And we're going to look at a new kind of market here today. We've been focusing on product markets and so forth. So I want to go, let's see here. Hang on just a second. We'll come back to that chart I was just talking about just a moment ago. So I'm behind the 8 ball today. Let's see here. I just did this. This is not right. Pardon me here just a second while I talk to myself, okay? Is that all right? I thought I put our PowerPoint slides on, but I guess Dr. Lynn and I were just so engaged in conversation there. I think that's chapter 16 is what this should say. Okay, hang on, class. My apology on this. Okay, all right. Okay, so let's go to the PowerPoint slides if we can, Radar. Okay, so we're going to talk, back up and kind of start up with chapter 16 again. I gave you a flavor of where we were going last time. And I have a little fix to mention there, one more here in chapter 16. So in chapter 16, we look at the market for resources. So if I can find my cursor, and it's not, here we go. Hard to see, let's just do it like this. Okay, some topics we're going to talk about here in chapter 16. Resource pricing, okay? What determines the price of your labor or the price of machinery, that is capital and so forth. And so we're going to talk about that. And why does it matter? Why are we doing this chapter in the first place? Okay, why not just forget it and go home early, okay? I guess we could do that. But if you're in business and so forth, working in any aspect of business really, at some point, you're going to encounter the question, why is labor priced the way it is? So if you're a manager and you want to hire labor, and I say hire labor, you might have engineers work for you and what have you. Why do you have to pay a certain wage rate or salary to attract quality talent? So that's what we're going to look at first today, significance of resource pricing and what justifies resource pricing. Why does it matter? Okay. Marginal productivity, theory of resource demand. So the last two words is what's really key here. We're in a new kind of market here. So we've been talking about product markets, demand and supply, right? And with product markets, we talked about market equilibrium. That's where those two curves intersect. We talked about elasticities, which has to do with the slope of those curves, price elasticity of demand and supply. What causes those curves to shift and thus affect equilibrium? Those are things we looked at. We're going to see the same ideas, the same concepts here now that we go to to resource or factor markets. Okay, so up to this point we've been looking at product markets. Now we turn our attention to resource markets. The determinants of resource demand. Remember the determinants of product demand? They determine the position of the demand curve. That's kind of the same thing here when you talk about resource demand. We're going to have this same kind of framework where you got price on the vertical axis, quantities measured on the horizontal axis, and at any rate you got a supply and demand curve in that framework, and things determine the position of each of those curves, the supply and demand, so forth. Elasticity of resource demand and so forth. Okay, so why do we care about this chapter? Okay. Why do we care about the demand for resources? Well, again, that circular flow we looked at before, I forget, that was like chapter 1 or chapter 2. I won't be able to put my finger on it here. But in product markets, you're looking at one loop in that circular flow. Hopefully the word circular flow sounds familiar to you. But in that part of the loop, households are sellers. They're not buyers like they are at Walmart in product markets. You have something to sell. I have something to sell. As a household, we have things to sell. And we do that to generate some sort of income for ourselves. So resource prices determine household incomes. Okay? The money income that your household enjoys is determined by what your household earns in the way primarily of your selling of labor to a firm or what have you. So if you're an employee, you sell your labor. And so that is a source of income for your household. So, I mean, we all like high salaries. We like to, if we can make a good wage, that's good. What things will affect the wage that we earn for our household? You realize that a household's income is a firm's expenditure. So we mentioned that households and firms have the reverse roles in product markets in resource markets than they have in product markets. In resource markets, households are sellers, firms are buyers. So firms are buying your labor. So why would they pay one worker $20 an hour and another worker $30 an hour? What affects that? And you see these differences across occupations. You see it in different industries. It'll vary by industries and location and so forth. So we're going to look at those things. But wages is not the only thing that accrues to a household in resource markets. Okay? Firms also rent things from households. Okay? So that's another source. Rental and interest, or say rent and interest and profit are things that come into a household because a firm is expending money to obtain resources they need to make products. So we're going to primarily focus on kind of two broad categories of resources here. But they're by no means the only ones. But we're going to talk about labor and capital. Okay? Labor and capital. So firms will expend money to get your labor, and for you that's a wage. So wage is one thing that a household enjoys when it sells something to firms. Sells its labor, it gets wages. If it rents out property, what have you, then it's going to have rent coming in. So we're going to focus on wages and rent. And this is the price firms pay for labor and capital respectively. And when I say rent, there's a lot we could say there, but we're just going to kind of keep it simple initially, okay? So if you have machinery or if you got land or something, you can let a firm utilize those resources by paying you rent, okay? So at any rate, that's why we care, okay? It's because of what households have to gain in the way of income, money income coming in. We're going to look at how firms combine resources to achieve the lowest cost of production. Okay, that's the cost minimization problem. That's a little later in this chapter. Resource allocation, that's another topic we'll look at here in this chapter. That is, how does society allocate these resources to different industries? Okay, so that's a significance of resource pricing we're going to see, and then policy issues. You can read about this on page 322 in your text. Okay, we're going to make these simplifying assumptions here just so we can kind of understand what's going on with resource or factor markets. Those terms mean the same thing. We're going to assume perfect competition in the product markets. So labor is exchanged in a product market to make a product, and we're going to assume, at least initially, that product is exchanged in a perfectly competitive environment. Okay? So we've talked quite a bit about perfectly competitive product markets. That firms that participate in those product markets that are selling calculators at Walmart and so forth, if it's perfectly competitive, the firms are price takers. Okay? A wheat farmer is a price taker and so forth. So we've talked about perfectly competitive product markets. We're also going to assume that the resource markets, at least initially, are also perfectly competitive. Okay? So there's someone who's a price taker. Okay? So, a wheat farmer is a price taker, in a product market. They sell wheat, but no wheat farmer is big enough to affect the price of wheat. So they're a price taker. Understand that? What's it mean to be a price taker in a resource market? Okay? It's a little different thing there. We're going to see that if the person selling their labor is kind of like the wheat farmer selling their wheat, they're going to have to accept a price that's determined over in the market. They are also price takers. Okay? Don't get hung up on that too much, but we're making some simplifying assumptions here. Both types of markets here initially are competitive markets. This is really something, though, the next thing is something to keep in mind, that the demand for a resource is a derived demand. It's derived because you're producing a product that people want to buy. Very few people want to buy a conveyor belt. They're going to say, I'd like to have a new tractor, I'd like to have a conveyor belt, and so forth. No, those things are sought by businesses so they can produce something with them, produce a product or a service to sell. And if they didn't have that product or service to sell, they wouldn't care about buying the resource. They're sure not going to hire you or me. Not if they can't take our input, our labor, and make something that people want to buy, want to enjoy in their lives. So that is to say, the demand for resources is derived because there's a product ultimately in view here. And so these are the two things, these are the two major things here that drive the demand for this derived demand. Okay? The marginal product of the resource and the price of the product it produces. So you put those two things together, and that's what we were doing last time in this chart here on page 323. I want to go back and look at this chart just a second, and I have can we go to the document, Kim? Okay, thank you. So this is where we left off last time. I need to fix something because I read this a little. Last thing I ever want to do is leave a mistake on the board, so. This is table 16.1 in your text. Again, make sure that says multiply over there. In your book, it says subtract. So if you'll mark that out. All right. So we have units of a resource. So this would be like workers, the total product that they produce. Let's just say they're calculators, okay? Or something else. So one worker can produce 7, 2 workers can produce 13, 3, 18, and so forth. This column here is the marginal product, which is the change in the output divided by the units of input. So again, where does that come from? Marginal anything. Say marginal product, it's the change. In this case, it's the change in the total product. Okay? Divided by the change in the resource. Remember, we had a formula like this when we talked about marginal cost being the change in the total cost divided by the change in the units that are being traded and so forth, or being produced. Same sort of thing. When you hear marginal here, marginal in economics refers to change. It's a rate of change. Okay? So you just simply get the numerator here by taking the difference in these two, and the denominator, these are being incremented by 1. But if these were incremented by 10 or 100 units apiece, then you would take the change over here and divide by 100 or 10 or 100, whatever the change, the increment is in row or column number 1. That's going to give you the marginal product. All right, so here it's pretty easy. Just take the difference in these two. And this is 7. The difference in these two is, 6, and so forth. All right, so I gave you this little chart here where we can work this same problem just a little bit. I may have given somebody, it's in a bit of a, okay, let me see. I'm going to give you a minute here just to show you how you can use this little chart here. I've taken that same data here and put it in this same data here and given you some structure here. We can use this little chart here, and we're only going to use the left side of this chart to do table 1 on page 323 of your text. So these are the same columns. Units of resource, total output, marginal product. You see that here. Quantity of output, total product, marginal product. I went ahead and put the product price here. You see this here? And you get total revenue, and then you get the marginal revenue product. So I want to step through this again here. Okay. All right, so they give you this data there in the table. Make sure you understand this is the total product. This is the marginal product, which is just, here we go, differences in successive increments here of total product. Here's the price of the output. Okay, so you get total revenue here, which is the total product times its price, right? If you take these two things here, multiply them together, you get total revenue, right? So I've just kind of copied this over. They tell you the little, it's as much as what they tell you here, where the total revenue is 2 times 4. It's column 2 times column 4. So that would be your total revenue. And then we have this last column here called the marginal revenue product. Now here, I prefer this table. Let me tell you why I prefer this table than just kind of speaking from this thing here. You'll notice, and technically they're correct here, but you won't see this in all books, they stagger the marginal between the totals, because the marginal applies really to the interval itself, or the product that's in the middle, to the 0.5 units of output and the 1.5 unit of output. It's telling you there what your marginal product at that level is. Okay, it applies to this interval. But I went ahead and shifted these down because really, and this is just fine, you can think of the marginal product of the first resource as being 7 units of output. Let's just go ahead and shift that 7 down. Okay, it just makes things a lot easier here. See what I've done here? I haven't put the 7 here between the 0 and the 7 here. Go ahead and shift those down. It just makes this thing so much easier to read. And I found myself last time, it's like, oh, this is kind of hard. This is kind of hard to read the way they have it there. So I'm going to give you a minute, and that's really what we see here in table 16.1 on page 323 of your text. Again, you got total product. I'm going to drag my feet here a little bit, give you a chance to write these down if you want. I've got a few more of these charts. But hopefully in working with this, you'll get kind of a feel for what we're doing here. In constructing the demand for resources, the demand for your labor, and so forth. So we're just going to look at labor in this example. That's why I circled labor there at the top. Okay. Now you really should be able to start with the first column and get the numbers in the second, I'd say this column. You should be able to take these 2 columns here, but at any rate, get the numbers in the next column, right? You just take the differences. So we've done this sort of thing before. The price of the output is $2, never changes. So again, what kind of product market is this? Price never changes. So this producer here is a price taker. They receive $2 for every unit of output. So what kind of product market do we have here? Do we know? If you're a price taker, it's what kind of market? Well, it's perfectly competitive, right? If you're a price taker, And that's the term they use here, pure competition here. If you're a price taker, you're in pure competition. Okay? Right? You don't have any effect on price. So total revenue is simply the product of these two numbers. So if you sell 0 units for whatever price, your total revenue is 0. If you sell 7 units at $2, your total revenue is 14. 13 units at $2 is 26, and so forth. That's your total revenue figures. Okay? So we have this last column, and this is what's so important to us. Okay? This is called the marginal revenue product column. We use MRP for short. Okay, now there's a couple ways to find the marginal revenue product. There's 2 ways. We were running out of time last time when we looked at this, but so I didn't get to show you both ways. I showed you one way. I broke this down and I said marginal revenue product is the marginal revenue times the marginal product. Okay, you have a column for each of these. Okay, there's the marginal product column here, right? So this is marginal product. Where's the marginal revenue product? Or do y'all see what the marginal revenue is for each level of output? It's the price, right? Remember, in perfect competition, recall in PC, perfect competition, marginal revenue and price are the same thing. Remember that horizontal demand curve that faces an individual supplier? Perfect competition, the price and marginal revenue are the same. So the price of the output is the marginal revenue. Okay, if you want to look at it that way. So if you take these two numbers here, you're going to get the number over here called the marginal revenue product. This times this, okay, that's 0 times that is nothing. But 7 times 2 is 14, 6 times 2 is 12, 5 times 2 is 10, and so forth. Called the marginal revenue product. Okay, another way of looking at it, again using our definition for marginal. Remember marginal, anytime you hear marginal, this is marginal revenue product is the change in something divided by the change in something else. Just as we did a moment ago when I wrote this at the top. We wrote this at the top of page 323, right? It's a change in one thing divided by the change in something else. In this case, okay, it's the change, what do you think here? Marginal revenue product. Okay. All right, you demand. Change in total revenue divided by the change in the quantity of labor. Does that make sense, class? So it's another way of computing this MRP if you want. All right, so this 14 here, okay? All right, marginal revenue product is the change in the total revenue divided by the change in the product. Or say change in the quantity of labor. So we go from 0 to 1 worker, increases our revenue by $14. So here this is going to be a plus $14 in total revenue as we add 1 worker. Okay, add 1 worker. So this is $14 per worker. Okay, so that first worker, now is really generating for us $14 in additional revenue. Now, if you only had to pay that worker $12, would you want to hire the first worker? You got this plant set up, and they're going to increase your top line on your income statement, your revenue by $14. Yeah, you would, wouldn't you? Yeah, you would. Hope so. Now, let's look at these two here. There's your total revenue. Looks like it's going to go up by 12, and your total labor goes up by 1. So the marginal revenue product there is 12. Okay? So if you have to pay your worker $12, well, that's probably a good worker to hire, okay? But you'd stop there. Okay? So if you have to hire workers at $12 a piece for your little plant here, you're going to want to hire 2 workers. 2 workers. See how practical this is? We want to hire 2 workers. Okay, what if the wage rate here were $5 a worker? And you got this data given here, and see how we filled this out. You can get this last column by either doing this approach or what we're doing here. And the wage rate, it's $5 a worker. How many workers would you want to hire, do you think? Okay, you're close. 5, okay, you're thinking right. Probably want to hire 5 workers, wouldn't you? Because the first 5 have a marginal revenue product that exceeds the wage. So they're giving the company more than they cost. Okay? So they're a good buy, right? Now that 6th worker increases total revenue by $4, but if you're paying $5 a worker, then that was not a smart worker to hire. That might have been a smart person, but it wasn't smart to hire that person, okay? So what you see here is that you've got a relationship here between the wage rate and the number of workers you want to buy, determined by the marginal revenue product. They sketch the marginal revenue product for you here. In this case here, for 1 worker it's 14, for 2 it's 12, for 3 it's 10. They sketch that for you on page 324 of your text. See it there? 324. See if that's going to adjust. So, like I say, if the wage rate's $5 a worker, then how many workers are you going to want to hire here? Well, you could just draw a line over here. 5 looks to be right about here, and looks to me like you'd want to hire you know, this many workers. At $4, you might want to hire that 5th worker, okay, or 6th worker. I think their dot is, here it is right here. Can y'all see that? They got a little dot on the diagram there. Okay, so if the marginal revenue product is $4 or the wage is $4, you just want to hire that 6th worker. Okay, so this dot should be right about there. But the point here is that you have a curve here, the marginal revenue product, that gives you the relationship not only between the resource price and the quantity of the resource here on the horizontal axis, but it tells you how many units of the resource you want to hire for each wage rate. How many laborers do you want to hire? Okay, that's what the marginal revenue product is. So if the wage is $8, okay, we can go from $8 and look at this table or look at that graph. And it looks to me like, okay, you're getting more bang per buck out of the first 3, and then go ahead and get that 4th one there. You know, you're going to be pretty close here. So they do a little fudge here, but what it all goes back to, it kind of makes it a little bit of a challenge here, but we kind of slid these where these fit right here. But really, like the marginal revenue product, they compute, here's that table again. Over here, this 14 kind of applies in the region of 0 to 1. But I'm just telling you here that kind of make things easy for us. Let's just kind of use our chart, and you see this in other books. I'm not a real fan of the way McConnell and Brew, or this is McConnell and Brew, do this, but we'll just apply these to the next whole unit of resource. So, okay, we can plot this same graph here, the marginal revenue product, and you have what's called a labor demand curve. Okay, so this kind of makes it kind of neat, is that with any demand curve, you got price on the vertical axis, and you got measured in dollars, you got quantity on the horizontal. Now with product demands, this is quantity of the product. Now it's going to be quantity of the resource. This is going to be the labor market, okay? Now I say labor market, that's pretty generic, but this could be the labor in a certain industry, okay? Could be the labor, could be unskilled labor or what have you. But at any rate, we see that, say for this factory here, now let's just say, let me not use the word market here just for a second. Let's just say the labor demand for an employer. I prefer to do that. For an employer. Okay, labor demand for an employer. We'll construct the market later. It's going to be downward sloping as well. But okay, so if the marginal revenue product is $14, then you would want at a wage of $14 to hire one worker. Okay, so I just connect that right there. So you see what we're doing here. The next point for 2 workers is going to go through 12. Okay, and so forth. For 3 workers, the marginal revenue product is 10. All right. So you get a downward sloping curve like this. This would be the marginal revenue product. This is going to go down because these numbers go down. Why do these numbers go down? Because the marginal products go down. Remember, I said one way of getting the marginal revenue product is by multiplying these 2 numbers together. So multiply marginal product by marginal revenue. Of course, here it's a competitive product market, so they're selling tables at $2 a piece, what have you. So you just take the marginal product times the output price, gives you the marginal revenue product. So this doesn't change, but these numbers have to go down in the short run, remember? In the short run, the marginal product always goes down. So just simply sketch this thing right here, which is what we've done in this little diagram. Okay, we could continue this out. Say for 3 workers, again, this is $10. For 4 workers, it's $8 is the marginal revenue product for that 4th worker. I think you probably get the drift here, right? And so forth. Let's go to the 5th worker. It's going to be $6. And I want to stop there because I want to run out of room. This is the marginal revenue product curve. Another name for the marginal revenue product curve is the labor demand curves. That's why I wrote down here the labor demand for an employer, if you can read my writing. You may have, as we did before, several firms in a particular industry, and you can sketch the industry demand for labor, the labor demand for an industry by horizontally summing all of these individual labor demands that you would have, each one applying to a particular firm. We did that with product markets, right? Remember how we got the demand for a product in a product market as we horizontally summed the individual demand curves. Same idea would apply here. But what we really care about and we're thinking about here is how can you be a smart manager? I don't know. Somehow today I feel like I need a manager. Taking my time today. How can you be a smart manager? Well, you got to understand something about marginal revenue product. Okay? You might have an enterprise resource program your company's running on or something that'll tell you how many workers to hire. But somebody's got to know kind of how to operate that program, right? And how it's calculating things for you. And what I'm simply saying here is that in a market like this, you're paying everybody a certain price. Maybe it's $11 a worker or what have you. Then the number of workers that you would employ would be given by the intersection of the price line and the marginal revenue product line. So that's why this is a labor demand curve for a single firm. It takes you from the price of labor, say $11. It takes you from the price and tells you how many laborers to hire. In this case, it looks like 2.5. Okay, if you can do that. Okay. So this is called a labor demand curve. It's a marginal revenue product curve. You got the same thing for demand for capital. We'll look at that here in a little bit, and so forth. Does that make sense, class? Okay, see how we're sketching this marginal revenue product curve? So you need to be able to fill the table out. You need to be able to compute this last column. A lot of times, in a problem, these things will be given. Or I'll put it this way. This column, you should be able to take total output, and the price of the output will be given, And you should be able to fill out the rest of the table. You know, of course, this is kind of always the same. So if I give you this column and this column and this column, you should be able to fill out the rest of the table. You start here, find the marginal products, the change in total product over the change in quantity. Notice here, these always go down. They may go up initially. Marginal product may increase initially as you hire more workers, but eventually they'll go down. Remember our discussion on that. The factory that makes ball bats has 4 workstations. So that thing's going to hum along if you got 4 workers and you got 4 workstations, because then you can specialize, okay? And so their marginal products may increase with each additional worker. But at some point, okay, these numbers got to go down because you're in the short run, okay? You don't have enough time to go out and buy more machinery. You're just packing in more workers here. Marginal product of each successive worker eventually has got to go down. The price of the output, that should make sense here for a competitive product market. It's all going to be the same. So total revenue, again, is this column times this column. And then there's 2 different ways to compute the marginal revenue product column. By definition, as Glenn suggested there, we take the difference here and divide by the difference here to get this number. Take this difference and divide by this difference. Okay? But also, okay, I mentioned here that marginal revenue product is really the product of marginal revenue and marginal product. So should be able to, you know, take these 2 columns here to get this last column. And you have then constructed a labor demand curve. If you plot quantity of labor on the horizontal axis, like you would have plotted quantity of product before now, and I said, sketch me a demand curve, you're thinking product demand. Here we're talking about resource demand, but quantity goes on the horizontal axis, and the price of each of those quantities here is on the vertical axis. So that's going to be over here. So plot that. And this marginal revenue product then is a curve that takes you from any price and tells you how much labor to hire. That's why we call it a labor demand curve. All right, now they show another one of these. Before we go to it, let me just say you need to read this section carefully here. They give you a rule for employing resources here on page 323. They talk about always employ resources to the point where the marginal revenue product equals the marginal resource cost. In the labor market, we got a 1-word term for marginal resource cost. You know what it is? The cost of a resource. What's the cost of your labor called? Rhymes with age. Wage. I'm being silly today. Rhymes with wage. That's the cost of labor resource here. And so when we were doing this thing right here, we said, this is the wage you got to pay, and for the wage you're going to hire up to the number of units of that resource, the number of workers, where the marginal revenue product equals the wage. In the labor market, the wage is the marginal resource cost. That's the cost of workers. So $11 a worker, hire 2.5 workers. If you do that, you will satisfy this relationship. You want to hire up to the point at which marginal revenue product equals the marginal resource cost. That's what these terms here mean. Okay? Sorry about that. I was off camera. So you're going to see that here on page 323. Okay? 323. Marginal revenue product equals so that's what they're saying. Rule for employing resources. Hire up into that point. Okay? Now, they give you another example in your book on page 325. Let's look at this a second. This is another problem, kind of similar to what we just did. The only difference here is we want to find the demand for labor in an imperfectly competitive product market. okay, like a monopoly or monopolistic competition, something like that. How can you tell by looking at this that this is not perfect competition in the product? Their product is not in a perfectly competitive setting. Can you tell? What's the key thing? What throws this? What do you think, class? You know it. I'm still nursing this cold, so I got to give myself a little chance here. How do you know by looking at that this is not perfect competition? How's it different than the one we just looked at?
Because the price is going down.
You got it. Glenn gets extra credit today. The product prices are going down. Okay, yeah, that's right. Product prices are going down, right? So this manufacturer and seller has some sort of market power, okay? They have an ability to affect the price of the product they bring to market. So it could be a monopoly, it could be something else. Oh, Mariah, I was going to want to give you one of these here before I forget it. Because you came in. Did anybody else come in? Here you go. And I guess I better grab that from you there too. Thank you much, Lee. Okay, so you see the prices going down there, right? So it's not perfect competition. This is not a price taker. This is a price setter. And they want you to derive the demand for labor again. So we can do the same thing, kind of the same story. And let me tell you what, I want to make this as simple as I can. And the way they stagger this kind of makes it a little tough. The result, I'll just tell you, the result is you get a little half unit shift in the demand curve. And I want to make this simple. So let's just use this little table here I gave you, okay? And for what you'll have to do in this class and the problems and so forth, this table is sufficient. So you'll see here, I'll give you a minute here to copy this out. But for each of these quantities, okay, you got total product output here, 0, 7, 13, 18. So there we go. And the marginal products we compute as we did before. This is the same thing, okay? The only thing different here in this example is that we have decreasing price. These aren't all $2, okay? They're not all $2. Other than that, it's the same thing, okay? So this is a monopolist, say, how many workers should they hire? Very practical question, right? Very practical question. Well, you got to know what's the prevailing wage rate. Remember, this firm, though it is not competing in a perfectly competitive product market, it is competing in a perfectly competitive resource market, okay? Which means this, you know, it's going to pay the same price for every unit of labor it hires over here. Whether it's 1 worker, 2 workers, 3 workers, it's going to pay a certain wage. Okay? So we can find out how many workers we would employ or need to employ if the wage were $40 a worker. Okay? Well, you'd be way out here. So let's choose something. Let's choose $6 a worker. $6 a worker. How many workers would you employ? It's if you got to pay, you're competing with other firms to buy workers, and if workers are all commanding $6, you know, for an hour, whatever the unit time is, how many workers would you employ? Well, the first worker's a good deal, right? Because their marginal revenue product exceeds that $6 wage. So's the second one. So's the third one. Do you want to hire the fourth worker? No, right? You wouldn't want to hire the fourth worker. So if the wage is $6 a worker, you want to hire 3 workers, okay? So we're using the information from this table just as we did a moment ago. We're just kind of constructing, I mean, we just have a little different circumstance here where these numbers are downward sloping. But at any rate, if you were to plot this labor demand curve, which is what the marginal revenue product curve is, it's a labor demand curve, and compare it with the one we just did for the previous example, you'd have these 2 curves right here. They show you on page 325 of your text. The first one we did for pure competition is the demand for labor, or the marginal revenue product curve. Okay, when we held the product price constant. Okay, it was a perfectly competitive product market. In this case, the price of the output is decreasing, so it's less than perfect competition in the product market. And if you plot that, it's going to be steeper. Okay, it's going to be steeper. This is the labor demand curve for imperfect competition. Okay, for imperfect competition. Both of these, though, curves can be used in the following way. They give you the relationship between the wage. See this over here, wage rate? What it says there, if I turn it, see it says wage rate. Gives you the relationship between the wage rate, which is the marginal revenue product, at some point on this curve. Let's say a wage of $9. I'm going to draw a little mark right here. This will tell you how much labor you want to hire at $9. You're going to hire more workers if that product price never does change. It's just sitting there at $2 under pure competition. You'll hire smart to hire a few more workers than you would here. Okay, but at low levels of output, you kind of have a reversal here. The horizontal distance to the green curve exceeds the horizontal distance to the dash curve when the wage is high. Okay, but at low wages, you'll hire more under perfect competition. Okay, so you got quantity of resource demand here on the horizontal axis, and you got the price of the resource on the vertical axis. Okay. What do you think, class? Make sense? Okay. All right. Okay, well, Dr. J is really feeling under the weather, and I hope we can make the rest of this time here today. Can we go back to the PowerPoint here, Radar? Okay. All right, thank you. Okay. So again, the marginal revenue products can be computed both ways. And so this is one way. This is the definition. It's the change in one thing divided by the change in something else. Okay, change in total revenue divided by the change in the resource quantity. Now, I like to write it this other way. And your book doesn't really focus on this much. I don't see it here. But you remember I said marginal revenue product is equal to the product of two things. And what are those two things? Marginal revenue and what? Marginal product. So anything that increases either of those two things, those two factors, will increase your marginal revenue product or the demand for labor. Let's think this through. Okay, so let me go back here, Radar. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here today. Okay, so marginal revenue product. Here's kind of what Dr. J would like for you to think about, because it also makes things kind of simple for us, is the product of marginal revenue and marginal product. That's how we, again, filled this table out, how we got the last column of this table. Okay? Marginal revenue product is marginal product times marginal revenue. This times this is this. Okay? Now, why is this important for us today? Well, this is your labor demand curve. This gives you labor demand. And what increases the demand for labor? Anything that will increase either of these two things. Okay, because you multiply them together, and that's how you get the demand for labor. How many workers are you going to hire? How many workers is it smart for your plant to hire? Well, that's going to be affected by the values of these things right here. If something increases the marginal revenue, your demand for labor is going to increase. In other words, that demand curve that we just plotted, remember you got price here, price of labor, you got quantity of labor here. I'll put an L there if you want. This curve is going to shift to the right. Okay? Now, is this an increase in labor demand? Or is this an increase in the quantity of labor demanded? Same thing we had with product markets. You're going to make the same distinction here. Okay, this is an increase in demand. Increase in labor demand. Got to be very careful here, because later your book talks about increase in the quantity of labor demanded. What do you think that would be if I were to draw a picture of that? Same thing we did with product markets, right? Increase, I'll give you a minute to think, because quantity of labor demanded. It's a different idea, right? When you insert the word quantity. Does anyone know? You're moving along a fixed demand curve. All right, so maybe here you want Q1 units of labor, here you want Q2. Okay, so if you're moving this way on a fixed labor demand curve, the only way you can do that is if the wage rate falls. If the wage rate falls, the price of labor falls for your firm. Do you want to hire more workers or fewer? More, right? Hey man, if they'll work for 50 cents an hour, give me a whole bunch of those, up to a certain point. Do what? Yeah, right. Well, you're bringing up something. That's exactly right. Yeah, we're kind of, that sounds ridiculous here, right? I have to remember, though, my dad told me, I worked for 50 cents an hour when I was your age. You know, your mom and dad do that. Yeah, I worked in a cotton gin. There were 2 cotton gins in our town. I grew up in, they were, one of the gin towers is still there, but I remember seeing it. But at any rate, so it sounds a little outlandish today, doesn't it? But this is an increase in the quantity of labor demanded. This is an increase in demand. So what we're talking about here, when I mention increase in labor demanded, what is going to increase or shift the marginal revenue product associated with each quantity of labor that we might hire, say the first worker, the second worker? What's going to increase the marginal revenue product or the wage those workers can command? Okay? All right, so let me just put something out here for you. You're a steel worker. Well, you wake up in the morning and you watch the news and President Trump says we're no longer going to import steel from Japan. Okay? That means the price of steel is going to go up. If you're a steel worker, are you happy or are you sad because of that news? If you heard the price of steel is going to go up, you're a steel worker. What do you think?
It's neutral. Get paid anymore for how much you make it.
Okay. Yeah, it's just think, I mean, it's, what's your common sense tell you? If the price of what you help make goes up.
More layoffs.
Okay, all right, well, okay, now, okay, all right. Very good thing to think here. I think what we want to do, though, is we want to look at this question here kind of in isolation. We don't want to look at how it's going to affect other markets and so forth. If the value of what you help produce goes up because it's scarcer, there's less steel available. You make steel. And there's only so many people who can help make steel, You know, it takes a lot of time to be trained and so forth. You're going to be happy. Why would you be happy when you hear the price of steel goes up? Yeah. That's right. You're of more value to the steel company, right? Man, they value you a lot more. Okay, price of steel goes up, man. I mean, they're going to make money. Guess what? You know your employer's going to make money? You're going to make money too. So your wage, you can go clamoring for a wage increase. Now that's relevant to what we're talking about here, okay? If the price of steel goes up, the marginal revenue of steel in that industry increases. And marginal revenue is one of these factors that gives you a marginal revenue product, okay? So let's look at, that's why this formula is so important. If you got this in your head, you really don't have to memorize anything on a few pages of your book dealing with the determinants of the demand for labor. Remember, we had determinants for product demand, things that shift the demand curve for a product. Though we call those determinants. You got the same thing here. Anything that increases this, increases that. Anything that increases this, increases that. So marginal revenue, the top line, steel company, U.S. Steel, I haven't kept up with the industry there, but who owns what steel company, but Nucor and so forth. If the price, though, of a U.S. steel company, their output goes up, guess what? They want more workers, okay? So whether you look at a fixed quantity, charging a higher price, okay? In other words, if I put this point up here and this point up here, a fixed quantity of labor is worth more. Or if I look at a particular wage and the firm is going to have to hire more workers at that wage, maybe they're locked into a contract and workers can't clamor for a wage increase. Either way, the demand curve is going to shift to the right. Okay, so here I've just kind of got rid of this right here. Just a second, I'm simply saying here that, if the price of a product goes up, there's going to be an increase in the marginal revenue product curve. So this curve shifts to the right. Remember, in economics, the independent variable is on the vertical axis. So to increase anything, you shift it to the right. Same thing as, since this is a downward sloping curve, shifting it up. So at any rate, if the price of the product goes up, there's going to be an increase in the demand for labor. Hope that makes sense. This is the first of several determinants they mention for you on page 323 of your text. Okay? All right. I'm just looking here for some other things that they mention here. Changes in productivity. I want you to read this. Changes in productivity will be reflected through increases in the marginal product. So that first worker, remember, produces 12 units of output. The second worker produces 22 and so forth. Now you send them to school, okay? You train them. That first worker may produce 14 units. The second worker total product would be 28 or 26 units or whatever. These numbers get increased. The total product gets increased. That's going to affect the marginal product. You're going to get bigger gaps between these numbers, by the way. Okay, in this column right here. Anything that increases the marginal product, say through training and what have you, is going to increase the marginal revenue product. So, your workers get trained. You, as an employer, you're going to value those workers more. Okay? So you're going to want to hire more well-educated workers than poorly educated workers. Because education and training and human capital and all those things affect the marginal revenue product through the marginal product that they generate. Okay? So, there's lots of things that'll affect the marginal product. Not only training. What if, let's just compare two countries here for a second. We're going to focus on that. I just want us to think about this today. Again, first off, anything that increases the marginal product of labor increases the demand for labor. Anything that increases the marginal revenue, like the price of their output, is going to change or increase the demand for labor, the marginal revenue product. So what if you compare two countries and the workers are about the same, they have the same amount of training and so forth. Okay, maybe this is Mexico and Vietnam. Okay. Two countries kind of we associate with the developing world. However, in Mexico, there's more machinery for the workers to work with. Okay, there is a higher quantity of capital. Where do you think workers are going to make the most money? In Mexico or Vietnam, if there's more machinery or more capital for workers to work with? Where do you think? Got any idea on that? All right, thank you. Well, who can produce the most? A farmer, who plows behind a mule or a farmer with a combine. Okay, I'm being a little facetious here, but if you got a lot of capital to work with each unit of labor, guess what? The labor is going to command a higher wage. So, you know, given everything else the same, workers are about the same, have the same talent, the same abilities, and so forth. Because the worker that has a lot of machinery is more productive. That's going to increase this marginal product here, okay? So if there's a higher capital to labor ratio, that is more capital for each worker, that's going to increase the demand for workers. Hope that makes sense, okay? So on page 327, I want to mention this here because you're just going to have to kind of read this here. They talk about that the quantity of other resources can change productivity and thereby affect or produce an increase in the labor demand. So other things equal, an increase in the productivity of a resource will increase the demand for that resource. See how Dr. J reads his book still, right? So anything that increases the productivity, remember this thing right here? So if you can increase this, you'll increase this. One of those things is the quantity of other resources like machinery and so forth. Okay? Technological advance. What if the machinery in one country, in a certain industry, let's say, and there's been some big advances in steel manufacturing. In fact, one reason why the market went to Japan for so long is because they got bombed out in World War II, and they started over with new steel plants in World War II that were using newer technology than we were using at U.S. Steel and Bethlehem Steel and so forth. Okay, had those big blast furnaces that we'd built 100 years ago. We were kind of locked into a state of technology. And in Japan, they could kind of go to a new generation there. They were taking advantage for a while of technological advances, and so they could produce a ton of steel a lot cheaper than we could here in the United States. All right, so if you look at two countries, and one country has more advanced technology to work with, expect, unless there's some sort of artificial factor, something else that props up the wages, expect the wages in the country that has the more technologically advanced manufacturing equipment to have higher wages associated with it, okay? Now, if you got labor unions in the United States, like we do in the steel industry, United Steelworkers, that's a big one, okay? Then they're going to resist any decrease or let's put it this way, a slower increase in their wages over time. They're going to resist that. So we have labor unions and so forth here in the United States that other countries don't necessarily have. But at any rate, what you see over time is that the country that's locked into an antiquated state of production technology will suffer lower wages. There's just a natural pressure on wages to be stifled a little bit over time because there's other countries that are using the advanced technology that are making their workers more productive. Here's another one. They list these three on page 327 in your book. So we talked about quantity of other resources, how much machinery is there for each worker, technological advanced, how advanced is the machinery. That's the second thing they mention there. The third thing is quality of the variable resource. So here you're talking about the quality of the labor itself. That's what they're talking about here. It's kind of, hope you can kind of pull that out of that. So they're saying, how much labor would you purchase or hire? It depends on the quality of the labor. So we're going to set aside these other factors, okay? Machinery and technology and so forth. Just look at laborers themselves, workers themselves. How healthy are they? Okay? Now we kind of have this circular thing in this country. Workers are healthy because they make a higher wage, okay? But it's the higher wage that enables them, you know, it's because their higher wage, thank you, okay? Their higher wage allows them to buy better food. The better food makes them better workers, okay? See what I'm talking about there? So where you have a higher quality of living, You have healthier workers. Workers are going to make more money. Okay, they're going to feel more like being at work at 8 o'clock in the morning and so forth. If they're better trained, if the average educational attainment is higher, and so forth, expect workers to make more money. Because, again, it's this second factor in this thing we keep alluding to here. Marginal revenue product equals marginal revenue and marginal product. So we're not looking at the product necessarily they're making. We're looking at how productive they are. How many units of the product can they produce? Okay, we're not looking at the product market here yet. I mean, we did when we talked about the product price, but we've shifted over here. Workers are more productive when they're better fed, they're better trained, and for these other reasons we just deduced, they have more capital to work with and so forth. Now, in the industrial West and industrial countries, what you have, generally speaking, and you see this more and more all the time, is we have a lot of machinery, but we don't have enough trained, healthy workers to operate the machinery. Okay? There's an abundance of capital in the United States. There's a shortage of workers. And when you got that situation going on, like anything else, when there's a shortage of anything, expect the price of that thing to be bid up. So there's a shortage of workers because we have, and it's getting more and more this way all the time. This is the new economy we live in. If you're not trained in some of these areas, then it may be difficult for you to get a job. Okay? If you're not comfortable with computers or robotics and so forth. I mean, General Motors wants to hire someone who is. Okay? So there's kind of a shortage of that in the United States. So there's an abundance of capital. There's a shortage of labor. When that happens, expect various industries, whatever it is, engineering. Okay? Expect the salaries to go up, wages and salaries. Why is that? Because you're an engineer, you better know how to do CAD, right? Computer-aided design. In the United States, if you can't do that, then you're out of luck. And we're going to teach that to you in school and so forth. But not every country has those things at their fingertips. So if labor is scarce relative to capital, expect wages to be high, right? If labor is abundant relative to capital. Now you see this in agriculture a lot, okay? In the world, there's two different ways to harvest rice. Okay, there's one way in the United States, use a big machinery, use combines to harvest grain and so forth. But there are still areas to this day, thank you, to this day where there's work done behind a water buffalo, okay, or a mule. My brother-in-law I used to watch him plow with a mule. Not too many people do that anymore, okay? If that's the case, though, if you're over in Southeast Asia and you see people behind a water buffalo and you see a lot of people bent over and they're harvesting rice that way, they're not making much money. Why are they not making much money? Because they're not very productive. Why are they not very productive? Is it because we're smarter than they are? No, but we do have more training. That training, we're better fed, that lifestyle, and we have more machinery to work with than they do. All of those are things that will enhance your marginal product of labor. So anything that drives up this second factor, okay, so MRP equals MR times MP. Anything that affects either of these factors, we've taken them in turn, but certainly when you talk about the marginal product of labor, there's several things that impinge on that and will increase those things. When you do, you'll shift the labor demand curve. That's an increase in labor demand. Okay. Now next time when we meet, we'll talk more about the increase in the quantity of labor demanded, where the labor demand curve doesn't shift. Workers are the same, training, next year as they do have this year, they're eating the same. There's no big advance in technology, production technology, any of that. But firms may hire more workers simply because, why? The wage goes down, okay? Not because the workers are better trained, thus shifting the demand curve. It's because they'll say, for some reason, they'll accept a lower wage. Firms will hire more workers in. So you're moving along a fixed demand curve. That's a change in quantity demanded. Dr. J is spent, so I'll see y'all next time.